This week in the world, Mr. Beast, Logan Paul, and KSI want you to eat mold, as many reported cases of their Lunchly line being as green as Shrek's tits. The Taliban has banned the displayment of human or animal images on TV, and Hassan Piker and H3H3 are in a heated debate to see who is more unwatchable. Starting our news week off as strong as we possibly could hope with the Lunchly story, and how the cheese on it may not be so drippy, bruh.
I like my cheese drippy, bruh.
Right off rip, as I'm sure many of you know, the product was met with concerns by fellow content creators, screaming things like think of the children, while almost all of them would be too scared to even approach a child, let alone worry about their needs. Regardless, a lot of this hate was centered around the nutritional value of Lunchly as a product, and how it could impact the overall development of a young youth consuming it. As you can imagine from the way I'm speaking about it, I felt like a lot of it was forced hate. I mean, all three of them already have valid reasons to be disliked, if that's how you want to vibe, my bro. But them three starting a product line together, and people pretending like they actually give a shit about kids just seemed a little bit put on for me. So when I initially heard reports of the Lunchly product apparently being infested with mold, I assumed it was fake news, until the YouTuber Rosanna Pontiano made a review of the product and discovered it for herself. My starter wife always has her on in the background, and honestly my neck nearly snapped in half when I did a double take to make sure it was actually her talking about the Lunchly product. As of right now, her video where she compares the two products is probably the most credible piece of proof that we have, as initially there were a few little whispers on Twitter, but getting moldy cheese is easy enough to fake, and I just don't see this woman somehow making this up for a little bit of clickbait, especially considering how big she is of a channel and how large her audience is. Why this is happening with Lunchly products still remains unknown, with the only information I could uncover was apparently that an assistant close to Mr. Beast used the cryptid messaging of saying consider the source when referring to the abysmal reviews on his product. I'm not sure if that means to imply that Rosanna is not a trustworthy source, or what the fuck it means. All I know is there still has yet to be an official statement from the company or any of the three. Choosing the mind, we go over to Elon Musk, who has the body type of cottage, as yet again Mr. Musk is in the news. I really don't think a week has passed since I've started the show that his face hasn't popped up. This time, the South African man is raising eyebrows over US election interfering. The 53-year-old African of the South man has publicly endorsed Trump and has openly expressed his political ideology is in line with that of the Republican Party. So much so, the guy from Pretoria is now offering cash rewards for voters participating in the upcoming election. Elon, the South African, has promised via his political PAC group, simply known as America, that those who sign their petition for free speech and gun ownership in 6 swing states, and then refer another who signs it, will be given a cash reward of $47 to $100. Furthermore, with those who have signed up already being in a prize pool to win $1 million, with a new winner being announced every single day, leading up to the polls opening on the 5th of November. There are so many obvious issues with it, and I'm getting less convinced every single day that this man is actually smart in any way. The initial issue is you have an extremely famous figure, and an extremely influential one, attempting to influence the election, which would be fine if that's all he was trying to do, you know, just saying who he was voting for, and people who like his ideology or people who like him could be influenced by him to vote one way or the other. That's not illegal, that's human nature. But the greater issue comes into effect when that famous figure is offering cash prizes publicly to attempt to turn the election in his candidate's favor. Of course, it isn't direct, but even a baby or a non-American knows that if you're trying to get people to sign a bill in order to protect gun right control, you're obviously trying to influence people to vote Republican, as a lack of gun control reform has always been one of their platforms, especially when that public figure is also offering cash rewards to swing people to vote one way or another, of course without it being direct, making the legal discourse incredibly hazy. Time will tell whether or not this is actually unconstitutional, but seeing as Mr. Musk and his PAC group has already stopped paying out winners of the prize, you would assume that some agency has already got a hold of him and plainly said, what the fuck are you doing? As a general rule of thumb, guys, when it comes to voting and offering cash for voting to go one way or another, maybe don't do it. Moving on to a country whose political identity does not matter, we go to one of the silliest lands in the whole world, Australia, where my Lord Sovereign was visiting with his lady wife yesterday on the 21st and addressing the kangaroo parliament, as is standard for UK royals going back decades, with Australia obviously being a former colony. What isn't standard is allowing anyone with a slightly darker skin tone than pink to not only speak, but to yell at the monarch in question. However, that is what happened when an independent senator from Victoria, Linda Thorpe, stormed into the House of Parliament donning a traditional Aboriginal cloak and yelling about colonialism and genocide, and most ghastly of all, saying, "You are not my king! Oh dear me!" She was of course dragged out of Parliament kicking and screaming by security. Linda, who I must say is half Aboriginal and half white, which is always the mixed oaks who have to compensate the most, is not new to the spotlight by any means, and is probably one of the most notable members of Australia's government. Not because she says anything special, but because internationally nobody gives a shit about Australian politics. She's also definitely the most annoying out of Australian parliamentary members, as she is extremely well known for pulling publicity stunts in the name of of First People's Rights. I'll rapid fire off a few of these so you can get an understanding of the type of person we're dealing with. In 2021, she spoke out against the new laws to change bail structure in Northern Australian territories, stating that the head solicitor of these laws was a white male. It was not, it was an Aboriginal woman named Selina Ubo. When a fire broke out and burnt down Australia's old parliamentary building, she tweeted, "Seems like the colonial system is burning down. Happy New Year's." She then deleted that tweet within the hour. During her swearing-in service of Parliament, she added the words "the colonius" when referring to the oath. If that's not clear, she was basically saying something along the lines of, "I promise to protect the rights of Crocodile Dundee," or whatever weird cuck we do down here, and then went, "the colonialist." She was caught having a verbal scrap outside of a strip club, and then accused the men of sexually harassing her, a claim that was debunked by the owner, saying she kept telling the men they had small penises, sorry, and that they stole her land. In other words, she's a crazy person. It's also sad to find out that this woman is not in fact 27 years old, but is actually a 51-year-old grandmother. Not literally, at least as far as I know, but I'm saying she is so old she could be someone's grandmother, and she's still acting like this. You are too old to be this naive. I don't know if it's because you're insanely hot, or you just sat in a car too long one day and fried your head, but you're literally achieving nothing through these stunts besides making yourself look silly. Although I will agree with you on one count. Fuck King Charles. As a refreshing mouthwash, we have a young child's dreams being crushed to laugh at. As at Anfield this Sunday when the table leaders faced Chelsea, winning 2-1, the drama wasn't so much on the pitch, but rather what happened at halftime on the pitch, when former Liverpool goalkeeper and England's first pick David James got in between the sticks to stop a couple shots of, children taking penalties. James took the very basketball expression to heart of no easy buckets, stopping not one but two shots against an 11-year-old. What a wanker. Dude, you're like a multi-millionaire. Just let the kid score a goal. Carrying on with funny antics, we move on to a notorious group of pranksters, the Taliban. In an out-of-character move, the normally chill vibes guys who have taken over the daily running of Afghanistan since the American withdrawal back in August of 2021 have now banned the broadcasting of living beings, animal or human alike. This follows the Taliban's efforts to increase morality within the nation, as fears amongst the group were raised over the virtues being violated from these television shows. I hate to say it, dude, but the Taliban absolutely rock cock. Could you imagine the idea of being so horny that a photo of a woman whose face you can't see and is covered head to toe could somehow tempt you? This latest Looney Tune scheme comes from the brain trust arm of the Afghanistan government known as the Vice and Virtue Ministry. Other classic practical jokes implemented by this wing include the banning of women being allowed to use public transportation, the banning of music, the banning of any female beauty salons, the banning of any further education for females after primary school, the banning of women being allowed to show their faces in public, and my personal favorite, the banning of women being able to speak outside of her home and or her place of work, which is the only thing we can agree on, brother. That is a joke. I think women should be allowed to speak. I'm a feminist. And ladies, if you want to talk about feminist issues, my number is right there on the screen for you to call me. Rah rah, fashion baby. Turns out these people are really scary. That didn't rhyme quite like how I wanted it to. The industry, where the top creamers are almost certainly always rich, privileged white women and or gay men, is absolutely choked with weirdos apparently. With the arrest of former CEO Mike Jeffries and his partner Matthew Smith being taken down for sex trafficking. Allegedly, both Mr. Jeffries and Smith would engage in the transportation of young men for, quote, tryouts, specifically for fashion work within the industry and or modeling. This being a disguise for their true intention of plastering the men with alcohol, muscle relaxants, and in some cases Viagra, in order to take advantage of them. They did this with the help of their middleman, a Mr. Jacobson, who would assist the couple to scout for potential victims, and then would proceed to traffic the young men into their despicable hands. As of right now, 15 men have come forward with more in the wing works, as stated by the prosecuting attorney, Aaron Peace. For the right now and here, the couple have been released on bail, with Mr. Jeffries having to fork over $10 million to be released, and his partner Smith only needing to hand over $500,000. Let me just get my magical crystal meth pipe. I see a future where more than likely this will completely get settled out of court. As much as I hate to admit it, I think we all know there is a price for justice, and if you're rich enough, you can pay it. Speaking of justice, it has been served, depending on the camp you subscribe to, as Chris Cabba's murder trial has finally come to an end. If you need a recap or are not from the UK, Mr. Cabba, a 23-year-old black man from Brixton, London, was shot shot dead in an armed police response in September 2022. Sounds like a clear cut of racism and murder, if you were to listen to community leaders like Anthony King. However, it wasn't that simple. Mr. Kaba was driving a vehicle linked to a shooting earlier that week, and when stopped by the officers who boxed him, as is standard police practice when it comes to subduing a dangerous suspect, Mr. Kaba began ramming forward in an attempt to flee the scene, and using his car as a weapon against the officers responding, prompting Martin Blake, one of the officers, to fire a single round through the windscreen, hitting Mr. Kaba in the forehead. In spite of being rushed off to hospital, he later succumbed to his injuries, and was pronounced dead that very evening. Questions were raised almost immediately by black citizens of the South London area as to the nature of the shooting and whether or not it was actually warranted, which in turn prompted a murder investigation by the IOPC and later a murder trial against the 40-year-old officer. But why? You see, in the UK, when it comes to firearm laws, they are extremely strict, and even more so strict with those who are actually allowed to possess them. As a rule of thumb, for officers who are trained within the armed response unit, their initial target must always be the torso, as there is less chance of killing the subject, and armed response officers are only allowed to go against this rule of thumb in cases of imminent danger, where the subject has to be immediately subdued or the subject could cause greater harm to those around him. It's basically a question of whether or not the excessive force utilized by the officer, i.e. shooting him in the forehead as opposed to the torso, was warranted. And in this case, with a jury that only took 3 hours to deliberate, it was, releasing the officer immediately, who was set to rejoin the police within the next year. Something to keep in mind as well is the jury, as well as the public, were intentionally kept in the dark about Mr. Kaba's past to prevent jury corruption via the news. Things like Kaba's involvement with the 67 gang and or his criminal record that dates back all the way to the age of 13. So unfortunately no angel as his family would like you to believe. It is clear now, after all of the facts have come out, that Kaba was a dangerous criminal that was willing to take out officers for his own escape. That is in absolutely no doubt to anybody, especially considering that police footage of the shooting was released to the public. But one of the concerns that people have brought to light is the police did not in fact know Mr. Kaba's identity at the time of the shooting, meaning they had no prior knowledge of his gang affiliation, and essentially, if you were going to put it in their words, shot at an unarmed black man in a vehicle. However, it could be said on the same foot that the police were aware that this vehicle was linked to a shooting earlier that week, and when confronted, the driver behind this wheel neither showed his hands and began trying to ram at officers. It's a matter of personal opinion, as both sides do have valid points, so I am afraid in this case I'm going to have to let you decide. In our last story of the day, a name I have not heard in a time, internet personality and host of the most miserably boring podcast out there, H3H3, is in the news with his very public bashing of likewise boring streamer Hassan Piker over the Gaza Strip. Ethan Klein, who is of the Hebrew faith and is married to an Israeli woman who actively served in the IDF forces, as is mandatory for all Israeli citizens, was critical of Hassan's viewpoints on the conflict as well as the larger platform of Twitch in of itself that he claims is anti-Israel, with all dissenting pro-Palestine voices being banned off the platform. I can't go into heavy detail over this. These guys talk for hours, dude. Hours. It's exhausting to scroll through it even passively. But Klein's biggest gripe seems to be the lack of acknowledgement of the Palestinian people's role in the overall war, and made reference to the fuse that blew the TNT, the Hamas attack on Israeli soil on October the 7th, and how Hassan, who is very much pro-Palestinian, never makes direct reference to the rapes and human atrocities committed by the terrorist group. As of right now, I can't find any public statement from the political streamer, which is probably for the best because I am becoming deflated just having to talk about these two. I will say though, however, Ethan H3H3's criticism of the platform are quite valid, as Twitch has been known to show favorites. But I will also go against Ethan H3H3 and say he is a punk bitch, as apparently these two at one point co-hosted a podcast together. So it's pretty safe to assume at the very least they were friendly. And I think it's extremely weak to criticize your pal in public, even if you had a falling out, without at least giving them a chance to, rebuttal your points in real time. It's limp-wristed. Speaking of limp-wrist, you can move yours over to that subscribe button if you want more weekly news. As always, it's been a pleasure, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.